And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Friday morning, IFR here over the northern interior, back out into the Seward Peninsula, southward here into the Kuskokwim Valley and lower Yukon River Valleys areas there. Marginal VFR along the coast and mostly marginal out here over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And pretty good area of IFR has moved into the southeast coast. For the afternoon, that dissipates but lingers over toward the border, especially up around the Lynn Canal over to Yakutat. Otherwise, marginal VFR here from the southeast interior all the way down to Dixon Entrance. VFR, south central Alaska here, Kodiak Island, and a lot of marginal VFR over the central northern, or the north central interior back to the west there from the western Arctic coast to the Alaska Peninsula. And then band of IFR with the next front pushing into the western Aleutians, coming up to Adak by afternoon. And then that band slips eastward here, not quite making it to the Pribilof, or actually still a fair distance from the Pribilof Islands for Saturday morning, but some IFR sliding in toward Nikolsky and then all the way back to about Adak. Otherwise, mostly marginal over the western part of the state again, and through the Tanana Valley now, and the upper Tanana Valley all the way over to the border. Could see some IFR just south of Eagle there, down to close to the eastern Alaska Range, but marginal VFR, Copper River Basin into Prince William Sound, and the southeast coast, marginal VFR with IFR to the east and the north. Then for the afternoon, Prince of Wales Island forecast to become VFR during the afternoon Saturday. Stays IFR up to the north, Juneau about the cutoff point there or so, with marginal VFR for the Gulf of Alaska, the North Gulf Coast, and quite an area of marginal VFR in the central interior, but the Brooks Range of the Arctic coast, VFR. Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, Kodiak Island, and most of Bristol Bay, VFR. And then that band of IFR here pushing eastward and starting to break up here, especially on the lee side of the Alaska Range there, but holding together enough to push IFR conditions probably into Sand Point, Cold Bay, Falls Pass, King Cove, those areas to Dutch Harbor, up across the Pribilof Islands into the northern Bering Sea. Passes for the Brooks Range tomorrow, Anatuvik and Adigan, both looking for IFR at times, probably mostly IFR actually through the day. Lake Clark and Merrill, though, becoming VFR for rainy. Windy, go marginal VFR, especially on the northern entrance. Isabel, marginal VFR, especially north side there. And from Intesta, look for occasional marginal VFR for the day Friday. And Tanita, marginal. Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels here, 2,000 to 4,000 feet there over the southeast coast. Otherwise, at the surface here across the southern Bering Sea. From there, looking at icing with the system here and the moisture, look for some areas of considerable moderate rime icing for the southeast coast here. Lighter amounts, less of a threat in toward Prince William Sound. And an area of possible isolated moderate, mostly light though, mixed or rime icing here over the north central interior there. And then with that big system coming in and all the moisture associated with it into the western Aleutians, they're quite an area of considerable moderate icing. Pretty good possibility there from about Adak westward to Shemya and Attu. And the jet stream here showing good winds, 150 knots, pulling that moisture eastward and northeastward here into the western Aleutians, taking a turn to the west and then dropping southeastward up to 150 knots there over the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian areas. Much lighter over interior Alaska into the Gulf with general area low pressure here, or trough axis actually, and then southwest winds 110 knots blowing into British Columbia. 9,000 feet here, low in the Gulf, winds blowing 45 to 50 knots, or 40 to 50 knots around that center. Much lighter though over Cook Inlet. And we've got southeast winds 40 knots there, eastern Brooks Range, more like the eastern north slope to the Arctic coast. And strongest winds here cutting into British Columbia south of the Panhandle. Out to the west, 55 to 65 knot winds ahead of that low there, just onto the edge of the map there. And then much lighter winds, diminishing winds here over the eastern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And then at 3,000 feet, south winds 65 knots here across the west central Aleutian areas there in advance of the front, and then much lighter behind it, becoming more westerly. And 40-knot winds just grazing the eastern Arctic coast there, mostly Kaktovik, Barter Island, those areas. Northeast 35 knots through the Bering Strait. And low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska with 45 to 50-knot winds blowing around the center. Turbulence-wise, occasional moderate chop, or I should say moderate turbulence. Considerable moderate turbulence. Yakutat over to Cordova and the Barren Islands there. Kamishak Bay and down towards Sitkinak area and toward the Aleutian Range, and out to the west from Atka Island all the way out to Shimianatu. Look for considerable moderate turbulence for a pretty bumpy ride out there for the day Friday.